She arrived at the school on a gray morning when the hallways felt louder than usual. Lockers slammed. Shoes scraped the floor. Laughter bounced off the walls like it belonged there. She moved through it all quietly, holding her bag close, eyes forward, breathing steady. New places always felt like this to her. Too many sounds, too many eyes, too many rules she did not yet know. She had learned to stay small, kept trouble away, or at least that was the hope. She had come from a different district, one where music was not a show but a comfort. At home, she sang when the house was empty and the world felt gentle. She sang while washing dishes, while folding clothes, while staring out the window at dusk. Singing was something she did for herself. It was never meant for a crowd. She never talked about it. She never bragged. She never even raised her hand in music class. She knew how fast a quiet talent could become a target. The new school was proud of its music program. Posters filled the halls with bold words about concerts, competitions, and awards. Students talked about auditions the way others talked about games. The music room sat at the end of a long corridor, and every time she passed it, she felt a mix of fear and warmth. Fear of being seen. Warmth because she loved what lived inside that room. On her first day in music class, she took a seat near the back. She listened. She watched. She learned who spoke loud and who stayed silent. One student stood out right away. He had a voice that filled space even when he wasn't singing. He joked, interrupted, and made others laugh. Teachers tolerated him because he performed well and kept the room lively. Other students followed him because it was easier to laugh than to be laughed at. He noticed her by the end of the week. Not because she said anything, but because she didn't. Quiet people often stand out to those who crave attention. He made small comments at first. Nothing that would stop a class. A look, a whisper, a laugh that landed a little too close. She ignored it. Ignoring things had worked before. But this place was different. The music room was his stage. He treated it like one. He sang loud even when not asked. He clapped offbeat to distract others. He mocked mistakes with fake sympathy. People laughed because laughing felt safer than silence. The teacher tried to keep order, but energy like his was hard to contain. She stayed still. She sang only when the whole class sang together. Her voice blended in, soft but steady. She watched his reactions. He didn't hear her yet, and she hoped he never would. She knew what happened when someone like him discovered a weakness or thought they had. At lunch, she sat alone or with students who didn't talk much. She listened more than she spoke. When people asked where she was from, she answered politely and briefly. She learned the building. She learned the rhythm of the day. She learned which corners were loud and which ones were calm. She learned that the music room was both a place of joy and danger. The first sign of real trouble came during a group activity. The class was asked to sing short lines one by one. It was meant to build confidence. Some students struggled. Some laughed through their nerves. When it was her turn, she kept her voice low, just enough to follow the task. It was clean. It was correct. It was careful. That was when he tilted his head. He squinted, as if trying to hear something again. A small smile crossed his face. Not kind, not cruel, but curious. She felt it right away. That look meant attention had shifted. After class, she heard him talking behind her. Not her name, he didn't know it yet, but words like quiet and shy and easy. She didn't turn around. She kept walking. Her hands shook, but her steps stayed steady. At home that evening, she sang longer than usual. She stood by the window and let the sound rise and fall. Singing helped her think. It helped her remember who she was before she worried about fitting in. She told herself to stay calm, to stay smart, to stay unnoticed. The next day, the teacher announced that solo practice would begin soon. Some students cheered. Others groaned. The loud student leaned back in his chair, smiling like this was his moment. She felt her stomach tighten. Solos meant spotlights. Spotlights meant risk. She tried to fade further into the background. She chose seats near the wall. She kept her eyes on her notebook. But attention, once sparked, is hard to put out. He watched her more openly now. When she spoke to the teacher after class to ask about an assignment, he raised his eyebrows and whispered something to his friends. They laughed. Still, no one said anything directly. Not yet. The tension lived in the air instead, heavy and waiting. Music class on Friday felt different. The room buzzed with extra noise. The teacher was distracted, dealing with a broken speaker. Students took advantage of the moment. The loud student stood up and joked about solos, about who would fail, about who would embarrass themselves. Laughter rolled across the room. Then his eyes landed on her. He pointed casually, like it was nothing, like it was a harmless suggestion. He said something about how quiet voices should be tested, about how some people needed a push. His friends laughed again. A few students looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. She felt heat rush to her face. Her heart pounded, but she kept her posture straight. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She hoped the teacher would shut it down. The teacher glanced over, distracted and tired, and said they would talk about solos next week. The moment passed, but the damage stayed. The idea had been planted. By the end of the day, whispers followed her through the hall. Not loud enough to report. Not clear enough to confront. Just enough to remind her she was being watched. She went home that afternoon and sat on her bed in silence. For the first time since arriving, she wondered if staying quiet was the right choice. She knew what she could do with her voice. She also knew what it might cost to let others hear it. Part of her wanted to hide. Another part, small but strong, felt tired of shrinking. She stood up, took a breath, and sang again. Not loud, not soft, but steady. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for sure. Her voice was real, and no one else owned it. The next week moved slowly, like the air itself was thick. She felt it every morning as she walked into the building. Eyes followed her more than before. Not everyone stared, but enough did that she noticed. It wasn't open bullying yet. It was something quieter, something that waited for the right moment. Music class became the hardest part of the day. She still sat near the back, still kept her hands folded, still sang only when the group sang. But the loud student no longer hid his interest. He leaned across desks to talk about solos. He joked about cracked notes and shaky voices. Each joke felt aimed, even if it wasn't said directly. The teacher announced that solo tryouts would happen soon. Not for a show, just practice, the teacher said. A way to help students grow. Some students looked excited. Others looked nervous. She felt both feelings twist together inside her. She told herself she didn't have to volunteer. She could stay quiet. She could blend in. That plan had always worked before. But this time it felt fragile, like glass already cracked. During one class, the teacher asked students to share thoughts about a song they were learning. The loud student raised his hand right away. He talked about power and confidence. He talked about how singers should be bold. Then, without being asked, he glanced at her and said some people hid because they were afraid. A few students laughed. Others looked away. The teacher frowned but moved on. Her chest tightened. She wanted to disappear, but she also felt something new. A small spark of anger. Not wild or loud, but steady. She had done nothing wrong. She had followed every rule. Still, she was being pushed. After class, a girl from the front row caught up with her in the hallway. The girl spoke softly, saying she liked her voice during group singing. The comment was kind, but it made her nervous. Kindness can draw attention too. At lunch, she noticed whispers increase. She heard her described as quiet, strange, and shy. No one said she was bad. No one said she was good. It was like they were waiting to decide. The loud student made his move later that week. The teacher stepped out of the room to take a call. The class grew noisy. He stood up and walked to the front like he belonged there. He clapped his hands and joked that they should hear some hidden talent. He pointed at her. He said her name wrong on purpose. The room laughed. He told her to sing something, anything, just one line. He said it like a challenge, like a game. His friends tapped their desks, chanting softly. Her heart raced. Her hands felt cold. She stayed seated and shook her head. She said no, quietly but clearly. That should have been the end of it. But he smiled wider. He said it was just for fun. He said she should lighten up. He said everyone was curious. The teacher returned before things went further, and the moment broke. But the damage stayed behind, heavier than before. That night she barely slept. She replayed the scene over and over. She thought about what might happen next. She thought about how easy it was for someone louder to control a room. She wondered if staying silent had already cost her more than speaking ever would. At home, singing felt different now. It wasn't just comfort. It was practice. She chose harder songs. She pushed her range. She worked on control and breath. She didn't tell anyone. She just prepared. The following Monday, the teacher announced that each student would be asked to sing solo for a short moment during class, over the next 2 weeks. No pressure, the teacher said. Just participation. Her stomach dropped. The loud student clapped and laughed. He said this would be fun. He looked straight at her when he said it. One by one, students were called. Some sang well. Some struggled. The room reacted to each voice. Applause for some. Awkward silence for others. The loud student made faces and comments under his breath. He enjoyed every second. When students laughed at mistakes, she looked at the floor. She knew that kind of laughter. She knew how it stayed with you. Her turn did not come that day, or the next. Each time the teacher skipped her name, the tension grew. The loud student noticed too. He whispered to his friends, glancing back at her seat. By Thursday, the room felt charged. The teacher called a few more names, then paused. He looked at her. He said her name carefully this time. The room went quiet. She stood slowly. Every step toward the front felt heavy, like walking through water. Her mind filled with noise. Thoughts told her to stop, to fake a cough, to ask to go later. But another voice inside her was calm. It reminded her of all the hours she had sung alone, of how her voice never failed her when she trusted it. Before she could speak, the loud student stood up. He said something about how she never talked. He said this was her chance. He smiled like he was being generous. The teacher hesitated, then told him to sit down. The room stayed silent. She reached the front and faced the class. She could feel their eyes. She could feel judgment and curiosity mixed together. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to escape but to focus. She took a breath. Then the teacher's phone buzzed loudly. An announcement crackled over the speaker. The moment broke again. The teacher sighed and told her to sit down. They would continue tomorrow. As she returned to her seat, relief washed over her, followed by something unexpected. Disappointment. She realized then that she was ready. The loud student leaned over and whispered that she got lucky. He said next time there would be no escape. She didn't respond. That afternoon, she walked home slower than usual. She thought about fear and control, about how her silence had given him power, about how sound could take it back. At home, she stood in front of the mirror and sang as if the room were full. She imagined the stares. She imagined the laughs. She sang anyway. Whatever happened next, she knew the moment was coming. And when it did, she would not look down. Her voice had waited long enough. The day she was meant to sing arrived with a strange calm. She noticed it the moment she woke up. Her heart was steady, not racing like she expected. The fear was still there, but it sat quietly, like it was waiting for instructions. She got dressed, packed her bag, and ate breakfast without rushing. Every small movement felt careful, almost respectful, like she was preparing for something important. On the walk to school, she listened to the sounds around her. Cars passing, birds calling, her own footsteps. She breathed in slowly and let it out just as slow. She had spent nights preparing, not just her voice but her mind. She knew what she could do. She knew what she couldn't control. At school, the whispers were softer now but heavier. People knew today mattered. She felt eyes on her back as she moved through the hall. Some faces looked curious. Some looked doubtful. A few looked kind. She held on to those. Music class came too quickly. The room looked the same, but it felt different. like the air had been rearranged. She took her seat near the back, the same place she always sat. The loud student was already there, leaning back, smiling as if the day belonged to him. The teacher began class by reviewing notes. The routine felt slow, stretched thin by anticipation. Students fidgeted. Someone tapped a pencil. The loud student whispered to his friends and laughed. She didn't look at him. She focused on the board. Then the teacher called her name. There was no announcement, no build-up, just her name spoken clearly. The room went quiet. She stood up. This time her legs didn't feel heavy. She walked forward with small, steady steps. She could feel her heartbeat, but it didn't scare her. It reminded her she was alive, present, ready. As she reached the front, the loud student cleared his throat loudly, like he was about to speak. The teacher glanced at him, and he stayed silent, though the smile didn't leave his face. The teacher asked what song she would like to sing. She named a simple one. Nothing flashy. Nothing meant to impress. Just something honest. She faced the class. For a moment, she saw everything at once. The desks, the posters, the ceiling lights, faces waiting to react. She let her shoulders drop. She took a breath. She began to sing. The first note was soft, but it was steady, carried across the room without shaking. She didn't rush. She let the sound settle before moving to the next note. A few students leaned forward without realizing it. Her voice grew stronger as she went on. Not louder, just fuller. She sang with control, shaping each word carefully. She didn't look at anyone. She focused on the feeling of sound moving through her chest, her throat, her breath. The room stayed silent. Not the awkward kind of silence. The listening kind. The loud student shifted in his seat. His smile faded just a little. She reached a higher part of the song. The kind that usually made students crack or pull back. She didn't force it. She trusted her breath and let the note rise naturally. It was clear. It held. Surprised even her. A few mouths opened slightly. Someone near the front whispered "wow" without thinking. She continued, calm and focused. She wasn't performing for approval. She was sharing something real. When the song ended, the final note hung in the air for a second longer than expected. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon, the room filled with applause. Not loud cheering, but honest clapping. The kind that comes from being moved. She opened her eyes. The teacher smiled, clearly impressed. Several students nodded at her. A few even looked embarrassed, as if they realized they had judged her too quickly. The loud student didn't clap at first. He looked down at his desk. When he did clap, it was slow and quiet, almost forced. The teacher thanked her and told her she had a strong voice and good control. The words were simple, but they meant more than praise. They meant recognition. She returned to her seat. Her hands trembled slightly now, but it wasn't fear. It was release. As class continued, the energy shifted. Other students sang after her, but the room didn't react the same way. Comparisons formed without being spoken. The loud student volunteered to sing next. He stood with confidence like he always did. He chose a song meant to impress. He sang well. No one could deny that. But something was different. His voice was loud, but it lacked the calm strength hers had carried. When he reached higher notes, his voice strained. He recovered quickly, but the strain was noticed. The applause he received was polite, not amazed. He glanced toward her seat, just once. She didn't look back. After class, students stopped her in the hallway. Some told her she sang beautifully. Some said they didn't know she could do that. One student admitted they had been nervous for her but felt proud afterward. She thanked them quietly. Praise still felt unfamiliar, but it didn't scare her anymore. The loud student passed by without speaking. His friends followed him, quieter than usual. At lunch, she didn't sit alone. A few students joined her table. The conversation was simple. Homework, music, nothing heavy, nothing cruel. She realized something important then. Her life had not changed because she sang well. It changed because she stood up. That afternoon, she walked home with lighter steps. The world felt louder in a good way. She hummed to herself, not caring who heard. At home, she told no one what happened. She went to her room and sang again, softly, just for herself. She knew the story wasn't over. Attention can bring new challenges. But she also knew something else now. Her voice was not a weakness. It was her strength. The days after her solo felt unfamiliar, like she had stepped into a version of school she had never seen before. Nothing dramatic changed. No announcements. No sudden fame. But small things were different, and she noticed them right away. People smiled at her in the hallway. Some nodded instead of looking away. A few students who had never spoken to her before said hello. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was new. She felt seen not as a joke or a rumor, but as herself. Music class carried a new tone. The room was calmer. Students listened more closely to each other. Even the loud student had pulled back a little. He still talked, still joked, but the edge was gone. His words no longer controlled the room the way they once had. She stayed the same. She sat in her usual seat. She listened. She sang with the group. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt the need to hide her voice completely. When the class sang together, her sound was clearer now, more confident. The teacher noticed. During one lesson, the teacher asked her to help lead a warm-up. It was a small request, but it caught the room's attention. Her heart jumped, but she agreed. She stood at the front and sang the starting note. The class followed. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice did not. Afterward, the teacher thanked her and said she had good musical sense. The words were simple, but they stayed with her all day. The loud student watched from his seat. He didn't interrupt. He didn't joke. He just watched. At lunch, she continued sitting with the same small group. Conversations grew easier. She laughed more. She found herself speaking up when she had something to say. Her voice didn't shake when she talked anymore. But attention has a way of shifting, not disappearing. A few days later, a school announcement came over the speakers. The music department would be hosting a small showcase. Nothing big. Just a casual event for students to perform if they wanted to. Participation was optional. The room buzzed when the announcement ended. Some students groaned. Some cheered. The loud student leaned back and smiled again. He liked stages. He liked being seen. Several students turned toward her without realizing it. Not everyone. Just enough to make her feel the pressure. She felt the old fear stir. Showcases were different from class solos. They came with lights, parents, and expectations. She had never sung in front of an audience like that. That night, she sat on her bed and thought about it for a long time. She told herself she didn't have to do it. No one was forcing her. But a quiet question kept returning. If not now, when? The next day, sign-up sheets were passed around. Names filled the page quickly. The loud student wrote his name in large letters. A few others followed. When the sheet reached her, she hesitated. Her pen hovered over the paper. She felt eyes on her, though she didn't look up. She wrote her name. Her heart raced, but there was relief too. The loud student noticed. He leaned over and raised his eyebrows. He said something under his breath, half a joke, half a challenge. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Practice sessions began after school. The music room felt different in the afternoons. Quieter. More serious. Students practiced their parts, some alone, some with friends. She stayed late most days. She practiced carefully, focusing on control and emotion. She didn't try to be louder than anyone else. She focused on being clear. The loud student practiced too. He sang with energy, moving around the room like it was already a stage. People watched him. People always had. One afternoon, the teacher paired students to give feedback to each other. By chance, she was paired with him. The room went still. He looked surprised, then amused. He sang first. His voice was strong, confident. She listened closely, noticing both the power and the places where he pushed too hard. When it was her turn, she sang calmly. Not holding back, not showing off. Just honest. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he cleared his throat and said her voice was good. The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him. He added that she should watch her timing on one part. The comment was fair. She nodded and thanked him. When she offered feedback, she kept it simple and kind. She mentioned breath control and pacing. He listened, arms crossed, but he listened. Something shifted in that exchange. Not friendship, not peace, but balance. The day of the showcase arrived faster than she expected. The auditorium felt huge. Rows of empty seats stretched out in front of the stage. The lights were bright even during rehearsal. Her hands felt cold. Her mouth felt dry. She watched others rehearse. Some were nervous. Some acted confident but weren't. The loud student moved across the stage like it belonged to him. When it was her turn to rehearse, she stood still for a moment. She took a breath and began. Her voice filled the space differently than the classroom. It echoed back to her, unfamiliar but beautiful. She adjusted, listening carefully, finding balance. The teacher smiled from the front row. Later, as students waited backstage, nerves filled the air. Some paced. Some stared at their phones. Some whispered last-minute reminders to themselves. The loud student stood nearby, stretching his shoulders. He looked confident, but she noticed his hands shaking slightly. She realized then that everyone was afraid in their own way. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage with steady steps. The lights were bright, but she didn't look at them. She focused on the first note. She sang. The room listened. This time, it wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about him or anyone else. It was about sharing something real. When she finished, the applause was warm and full. She bowed her head slightly and walked off stage, heart pounding but light. Backstage, the loud student avoided her eyes. The showcase ended without drama. No winners. No rankings. Just performances. As she walked home that night, she felt tired but proud. She had done something she once thought impossible. She knew challenges would come again. Voices like hers often get tested. But she also knew she could meet them. She had learned that courage doesn't arrive all at once. It grows note by note. After the showcase, school did not return to how it was before. It settled into something new. The excitement faded, but the memory stayed. People remembered who stood on that stage and how it felt to listen. She noticed the change most in small moments. A teacher asking her opinion. A student saving her a seat. A quiet thank you from someone who said her singing gave them courage. None of it felt unreal. Felt earned. Music class became a place she looked forward to instead of feared. She still felt nerves, but they no longer controlled her. When the teacher asked questions, she raised her hand sometimes. When the class sang together, her voice did not hide. The loud student changed too, though he would never admit it. He was still confident, still sharp with words, but he was more careful now. He no longer picked easy targets. When he joked, it was lighter, less cutting. Some people noticed. Some didn't. One afternoon, the teacher announced a duet exercise. Students would pair up and choose a short piece to perform together. The room reacted instantly. Groans. Laughter. Whispers. She felt her chest tighten. Duets meant trust. They meant blending voices instead of standing alone. Pairs were assigned at random. When she heard his name paired with hers, the room went quiet. A few students exchanged looks. Someone coughed. The loud student let out a short laugh, as if it were all a joke. She stayed still, her face calm even as her heart raced. After class, he approached her for the first time without an audience. His voice was lower than usual. He said it was awkward, but they had to do it. He asked what song she wanted. She was surprised by how normal the conversation felt. She suggested something simple and balanced. He shrugged and agreed. They practiced after school in the music room. First, it was stiff. He sang louder than needed. She pulled back without meaning to. The sound didn't blend. They stopped. She took a breath and said they needed to listen to each other, not compete. The words came out steady, not angry, just honest. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. The next run felt different. He softened his voice. She held hers steady. Slowly, the two sounds met in the middle. Neither of them smiled, but something eased. Over the next few days, practice became easier. They spoke more. Not about feelings, not about the past. Just music. Timing. breathing, balance. She noticed that when he struggled with a note, he didn't joke it away. He worked on it, quietly. On the day of the duet performance, she felt nervous again, but it was a clean kind of fear. The kind that sharpens focus instead of stealing breath. They stood at the front of the room together. The teacher nodded. They began. Their voices moved in and out, sometimes leading, sometimes following. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The class listened. When they finished, the room clapped. Not wildly, not politely, just right. The teacher said they balanced each other well. As they returned to their seats, he whispered a quick thanks. She nodded. Later that week, rumors started. Not about her voice this time, but about how she had changed him. Some students said he was nicer now. Others said he was just quieter. She didn't care. Change wasn't her job to measure. What mattered was what changed inside her. She no longer felt small walking into a room. She no longer felt like her silence defined her. She understood now that strength could be quiet and still be powerful. One afternoon, a younger student approached her after class. The student said they were scared to sing because people laughed at them. They asked how she stopped being afraid. She thought carefully before answering. She said fear doesn't stop. You just learn to walk with it. The words surprised even her. At home, she sang less to escape and more to explore. She tried new songs, new styles. She wrote lines of her own, not polished, but honest. She didn't know where music would take her. She didn't need to know yet. Near the end of the term, the teacher asked if she would consider helping lead a small group next year. Nothing official, just support. She said yes. The loud student overheard and smirked. He said she'd be good at it. The comment wasn't teasing. It wasn't mocking. It was simple. The school year moved toward its close. Days grew warmer. Hallways felt lighter. On the last week of music class, the teacher asked everyone to share one thing they learned. Answers varied. Confidence, timing, teamwork. When it was her turn, she said she learned her voice mattered even when it shook. The class was quiet for a moment. Then someone clapped. She smiled. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing. She would never shrink herself again to make others comfortable. Her voice had carried her this far. And it wasn't done yet. The final weeks of the school year arrived quietly. There were no big announcements, no sudden twists. Life moved forward in small, steady steps, and she learned to appreciate that. Growth, she realized, often looks calm from the outside. She still walked the same halls, passed the same lockers, and sat in the same classroom. But she walked differently now. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her head stayed up. She no longer measured each step by who might be watching. Music class ended later each day as students prepared for exams and final projects. The room felt warm and familiar. The teacher trusted the class more, letting students lead parts of lessons. Sometimes she was asked to start a song. Sometimes she wasn't. Either way, she felt at ease. The loud student continued to exist in her world, but he no longer took center stage in her thoughts. He joked less and listened more. When he spoke to her, it was normal, even respectful. They were not friends, but they shared an understanding that didn't need words. One afternoon, the teacher asked the class to perform a final group piece. Nothing formal, just a way to end the year together. Everyone would sing, blending voices instead of standing apart. As the class practiced, she listened carefully to how her voice fit with the others. She didn't try to stand out. She didn't try to hide. She found the space where her sound belonged. On the last day of music class, the room was filled with mixed emotions. Relief, pride, a little sadness. Students joked about summer plans and complained about tests. The teacher thanked everyone for their effort and growth. Before the bell rang, the teacher paused and said something simple. Music, the teacher said, was not about being the loudest or the best. It was about honesty. About learning when to step forward and when to listen. She felt the words settle inside her. When the bell rang, students gathered their things. Some waved goodbye. Some hurried out. She stayed behind for a moment, packing slowly. The loud student stopped near her desk. He hesitated, then said he hadn't realized before how much quiet strength mattered. The words were awkward, but real. She nodded and thanked him. That was enough. Summer came and school faded into memory. Days grew longer. Mornings were slow. She sang more freely at home now, windows open, sound drifting out without fear. She didn't chase attention. She didn't post videos or seek praise. She sang because it felt right. When the new school year began, she returned with a different energy. She knew where she stood. She knew what she could do. New students arrived, quiet and unsure, the way she once had. She noticed them right away. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she offered a seat. Sometimes she simply listened. In music class, a new group of voices filled the room. Some confident, some shaky, some afraid to be heard. During one lesson, a quiet student was asked to sing a short line. The student hesitated, eyes wide, hands shaking. She watched closely. The room waited. Before fear could grow, she softly sang the first note along with the student. Not loud enough to take over, just enough to support. The student followed. The line came out shaky but real. When it ended, the class clapped. The student smiled, relief clear on their face. She realized then that her story was no longer just hers. It lived in moments like that. She still faced challenges. Some days her voice cracked. Some days doubt returned. Confidence was not a straight line. But she knew how to meet those days now. She remembered the girl who once sat in the back, afraid of being seen. She honored that version of herself instead of wishing her away. Because that girl had survived. And this one had grown. On a quiet afternoon, she stood alone in the music room after class. Sunlight filtered through the windows. Dust floated in the air. She sang softly, letting the sound fill the empty space. There was no audience, no pressure, just her and her voice. It was enough. She understood now that strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it whispers. And when the time is right, it sings. Her journey had started with mockery and doubt. It ended with confidence and purpose. Not because she proved someone wrong, but because she chose herself. And that choice would carry her far beyond any classroom.